Hi, everyone. Sean here from Unicorn Ventures, and thank you for joining me today. I'm really excited to be joined today by Alex Retlaff, who is the managing partner for Unify Ventures. G'day, Alex. How are you?
Good, Sean. How are you?
Very well. Thanks for joining us today. This is our third recording of Unicorn Ventures, and this podcast is for investors, but also for C-suite executives, founders, and entrepreneurs that are looking to take their business to the next level, but they might be struggling with a couple of things, like is their idea any good? And also, if I do require funding, where can I get that from? So I'm super excited to have Alex join us today because Alex, you've had such an extensive experience that's taken us right back to more from the technical background. So first of all, for our audience, why don't you tell us who you are and what you do?
Okay, yeah, look, Alex, yeah, as you mentioned, sort of put together Unify Ventures a few years ago with originally three partners. So three of us, unfortunately, we had to deal with one of us suddenly passing away. So we'll come back to that story if you want. And so that was very testing. But way before, I suppose. So originally come from Argentina, hence the accent. At 17, on my own as an exchange student, I fell in love with who is now my wife and the country itself, and never really went back. So then the TAFE software development, even though I love technology from a very young age, but I never really became a software developer. However, even right at the last 6 months of TAFE, we sort of introduced the major project that the team that I compiled at TAFE ended up doing and became my very first customer and my very first business. And so at 19, I launched my very first business with my TAFE mates. I kept that team over 6 different businesses out of 8 that I founded. And eventually, though, with the more significant exit that I'd had out of 4 exits, I had to leave the team behind. And so that's so I suppose that was about an 18-year journey with that same team. It was amazing. And I learned so much, been so lucky to be, to have such a great group of people around us. And the scale that the teams, sometimes were small, like if say, 5 or so people, all the way to about 20 or so people, depending what we're doing. So again, I'll give you some more details as we go, but that's effectively the journey. So played entrepreneur, 18 years, founded 8 businesses, exited 4, and then in 2018, on the back of a more significant exit, started angel investing, then started sort of backing funds, and that became the genesis to Unify Ventures as a fund of funds.
Awesome. That's why I wanted you on our show because that is a hell of an arc. And I think for our audience, no matter what size of business they're in, I feel that you're going to be able to drop tremendous value today. So the first thing I have to ask is your wife, was she Australian?
Very Aussie, although, can you believe it? Her name is Carmen. So
Oh,
Spanish name, but just very Aussie. Yeah.
oh, that's fantastic. And I guess let's start from the beginning. So you and some of your TAFE friends, you started the business. Was that Finance Now or was that one earlier or
Yeah,
what?
a bit before. So you done your research, obviously. So it was a bit
Yeah.
before Finance Now. I think it was Hunter CompuSys, a sole trader business. We had Northern New South Wales Soccer, which was a relationship introduced through my mother-in-law. She worked there, and that was the major project that I mentioned quickly at TAFE and at the end of TAFE. And yeah, so it was a member registration system for all the soccer players in Northern New South Wales, and they effectively have an access database that originally helped them improve, but then when combining the TAFE major project and this connection that I had with Northern New South Wales Soccer, it came the member registration system. And so, yeah, I stayed there for about 10 years until something like Soccer Australia replaced it with a nationwide system. Yeah.
Oh, that's
Um,
so cool. Oh, geez, it would almost be 18 months ago. I had an idea called Athlete 360, trademark for anybody that's watching.
yeah.
And what that was going to do was it had whatever your sports discipline was, you could log in, profile, and you could track your training, and you could also have influencers or athletes from that particular one, and you could have different coaches and give you different drills and so forth, and all leveraging AI. So, yeah, we might
Yeah,
talk about that one offline because I didn't get that
sure.
one off the ground, but that sounds
Sure.
awesome.
Yeah,
Um,
this is much more boring, Sean. This is just registering goals and that sort of stuff on the players and that sort of thing. But anyway,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I guess, choosing soccer as your first one or football, for Argentinian background seems like the obvious choice. What other industries have you covered as well through all your other companies?
Yeah, you would think so, but I got kicked out of Argentina at 17 because I didn't play much soccer. So anyway, that's the
That's
jokes
so
I
funny.
use these days. Yeah, okay. Look, effectively, it's in very varied. The commonality was because we were agnostic in the systems that we would do. Then people generally came to us because they had a bad experience once or twice before, and they sort of heard that we got people out of trouble situations. So we've done all sorts of things. I remember back with Kip McGrath, the educational network of tutors, Kip McGrath. So yeah, they're also Newcastle based where we're from, and so yeah, we did back then they would distribute it through CDs, and so we've basically packaged up their executable on our own sort of security layer. And so you would have to put in, you remember when in the back of CDs and those that you had a license key, things like that. So we basically added licensing to the Keep McGrath system. Then crikey, we did scraping back then. We did systems for in prop tech for an insurance repairer out of Newcastle as well. Anyway, on the back of a few systems like this, the Fun is Now project came along. So that one there was kind of amazing. It was this entrepreneur from the area that, and back then, by the way, I skipped a little bit. After Hunter CompuSys, I shut that down to join forces with my brother. And so we went 50-50 on a basically a computer shop in town. He would look after the hardware side of things. I would look after the software and software development.
Is
And
is your
so
brother's name Andrew or
Andrew, exactly. Yeah, you got
that
him.
was a guess because I saw AA Brothers and I knew you're an Alex, so it
No
had to be another
way.
A.
No way. You guessed that. That's amazing. Okay. You're very in
Well,
tune. It's
so what was
exactly
that
right.
like?
So
What was that like working with your brother?
it was good. It was good. Ultimately, yeah. When the Fun is Now project came along, that project really took off. And again, I'm going to tell you a bit about it in soon. But when it was that project that get us to come apart again. So we bought a property in town, like a commercial property in town. We set up a nice shop in front of the old post office in Newcastle. I think Andrew still runs Sayer Brothers, so it's been about 25 years. And he himself does a lot of software development now, but we departed ways on the back of finance now. So let me tell you a little bit about it. So this
Sure.
founder from Newcastle approaches us to do a system. He was getting his bum kicked with someone else. So again, the thematic of getting your bum kicked. And they said, look, they're stuffing me around. I got the money, and if you want to take it, the project is yours situation. And yeah, so within about a week of and a conversation that we had about a month prior to then him ghosting us to then coming back to us and saying, if you're ready, we can go. Anyway, unbeknownst to me, the founders of that business was Malcolm Turnbull and Russell Pillemer. And
Right.
so when I was early 20, a few years out of TAFE with my young team, we ended up working in one of Malcolm Turnbull's startups. That business went incredibly well. We effectively, it was Linda Burns. Linda Burns was, do you remember the show Gladiators? How old are
Oh
you?
yeah, yeah. I remember
Yeah, back in the
Gladiators.
80s. You
I
remember
think
the
there's
80s show?
Falcon and yeah, yeah. I
Yeah, so
remember
she
it.
was Flame in Gladiators. She
Flame.
was towards the top, Flame, curly hair. Anyway, Linda was actually a head of sales, and we would joke that she wrestled all these mortgage basically broking groups to sign up into the platform. But it was something like a year and a half. We had 4,500 brokers there in Australia using this loan origination system that we developed and released and so on as part of Finance Now. And that was an incredible experience. From that, I learned what a relatively small amount of money could do to launch a startup again, and I was barely 20. I could never go back after seeing what you could do, how quickly you can grow, and so on. And yeah, so that was an incredible experience. The other thing that was amazing was when something was a problem, Malcolm will typically come in and quickly leverage his network in a good way, right? But just knowing who to talk to get us out of, to get us out of that situation. So very quickly, if it was something to do with the bank or the bureaus or whatever, he would just, have those kind of connections to get things moving again. And it was just an amazing experience. I was leading technology and my own team. And I remember, going to CVA because, by the way, we had all these amazing lenders, CVA, NAB,
Yep.
St. George at the time, and all that in this loan origination platform. And I remember going to CVA, and there were like, 10 to 15 people on their side. And I would bring other people from our Newcastle office just to sort of make up a couple of numbers. But in reality, just like this disparity. And they didn't know how this kid with a thick accent but actually pulling off this technology. And to give you an idea, at the highest point, more than 50% of CVA's personal loan volumes were coming through our platform alone. And so the scale was
Wow.
so significant and they were so lost at the beginning of those projects. Once they got to know us and trust us, that all that went away. But initially, they were just so puzzled how Funnest now managed to do this. Yeah.
Now, to give people a time frame here, we're going back about 18 to 22 years ago, right? So
Yeah.
the big four banks certainly existed, maybe a little bit less competition, but it wasn't like they were a fly on the wall operation. CBA was probably the lead and probably still is the leading bank in
Yeah.
Australia. So to have 50% coming through the platform, that's a huge achievement.
It was. It was. They could not keep up. They could not keep up with the amount of loans that we were sending them through. It was about 120 approved loan applications a day. We had a beautiful system that took all that information online. Early days of the internet, still, early days of browsers and so on. That they were established, but they were very boring, sort of systems. You couldn't do a lot with browsers back then. And anyway, we had this technology that worked over the internet but didn't use a browser, and it completed a beautiful, the most beautifully filled loan application that then to go to CVA we would fax it through to the lenders because often they couldn't take those applications electronically, and so it was amazing. And so the way that we've done it is we actually replicated all the lending policies and scorecards, and so our tiny team in Newcastle was one of the few basically humans in Australia that would know the scorecards of all these major banks. And because there was no other way to do it, we had to decision those applications on our system, and let alone the ones that knew them across, about 12 lenders across Australia. So anyway, an amazing experience. So roughly, as you were asking, about 50%, it was around about 150 approved loan applications a day. So that meant all up, they had about 200 loan applications a day. Yeah.
So let's pause there for a second because I think there's a real good learning. So you're going back that you're in your 20s.
Yeah. Early
You're
20s.
you're working with one of the biggest networks. You've got an influencer, Malcolm Turnbull, on your side there and leveraging his network. But you're also having to set up this business from scratch, and you're having to manage people, and you're having to adapt and be agile and I guess change your systems to really meet the needs of the customer and the demand and the volume. Can you just walk me through how that made you feel and what was it, if there was a turning point for your business, a conversation that was had, a point of reality where you needed to go, oh, to stop the walls from closing in here.
Yeah.
How do you actually navigate that?
Okay. Great people around you. It was the guy leading all the actual architecture of the system. It was our head of the department at TAFE, an amazing software architect that I got in when we won the project and so on. For my responsibility was specifically around technology. So I was the CTO in Finance Now. Once my business originally developed the application, we were growing very quickly. And so the founder of Finance Now basically said, look, do you want to come and become the Finance Now tech team? or should we go and create another separate team? And we've agreed to do that. As I mentioned, that's when we parted ways with my brother, and effectively my first exit as selling him my 50% of that bit of AA Brothers. And what was it like? Ultimately, yeah, exactly. There were just this great group of people around us, and so at that time the tech team was around sort of about 14 people that we grew. We had to grow. I remember at some point we were about employing one person a month in the tech team, and that was about the largest team. All up, the organization was around about 25 people, right? So we had a call center and all that. So at each point we had to put obviously the sort of the leads of those teams, and then it was funny that we were working so hard, but it didn't feel that hard ultimately, right? Because we had this common goal, this very clear common goal on a business that was working. And so what I sort of take away from that, one of the nice takeaways that I like about that is that you can fix a lot of things about a business, right? The technology wasn't perfect, the call center team wasn't perfect, the sales team wasn't perfect. All these different functions weren't necessarily perfect in their own right. But because we had a viable business that was growing exponentially and we had the resources that we needed, we could kind of sort of come around and we had the time and the resources to solve it. I guess what I'm saying there is what I'm noticing is when you, I suppose, now develop a bit of a bias coming back to startup land, where I do have a bias of try to get revenue. And I know it's a very Australian thing to do, and in the US they say you can build for 5, 10 years. But I think bringing it back home right to Australia is that when you have revenue, then that sort of buys you the time to fix these things, to fix any issues, because it's inevitably, especially if you're growing quickly, it's going to be imperfect, right? You have to be comfortable with that. And then, I would also say, there's any one of 100 things, and it's about prioritizing which are the 30 things, not even 50 things. What is the 30 things that you should be doing over 100, right? If you want to think of it that way, right? And so are you doing the right 30% of the things that you should be doing? Because you just no scope. There's no enough people. There's not enough time to do all of those things. And so, being practical and having a great team around you. And I also say that I position myself oftentimes as a founder, co-founder, or something like that in a business to be able to capture the value that we were creating when, the couple of times that I had exits and so on. But that we all just work really hard as a team. And I try to sort of day to day bring that back to the team. And to this day, some of my most fun memories. The success doesn't last very long. The exit doesn't last very long. That lasts you weeks and months and whatever. But the time with your team is what I value probably the most. Knowing when to terminate a relationship with someone because it's not working, right? That sort of stuff. Not dragging things along that way. I keep on coming back. For me, it's down to the team, the very best people around you that you can get within your resources.
So I'm taken away from that. All right, surround yourself with the right people that have the experience. So you got someone who's head of tech and TAFE and brought them in. You're the CTO, but you're relying on their skills to actually bring the project along. But you also had, the founders or the money makers in there. But once you had the right people, it's about getting to revenue as quick as possible because that'll buy you time, and then not dividing your focus too much. So the top 30% of where you should be devoting your time, that's actually going to be moving the needle for you. That's either going to drive customers or drive revenue or adoption. Does that sound about right?
It does, yeah.
So that was okay, so you won that project, but then you started going on, and you said it before that you could never look back about what you could create for a relatively low amount of money using technology. And I think this is one of the differences that I've seen with some investors is that they might be financially secure or they've got lucky themselves with a good idea and they just love the entrepreneurialism of it all. But with yourself, you actually have a foundation of technical skill ability, and then we're able to create multiple businesses just through ideas, but leaning on your background. How I guess pivotal or instrumental would you say that having that technical experiences with when you went ahead and set up your own businesses?
Yeah, obviously, yeah, because was to the point that I could attract a team that would trust our judgment in sort of is this possible to do? Is this something that we want to do? But ultimately, the reality is, life is incredibly random, and one action that you do, one moment leads into some other opportunity. Like I give you a perfect example. So if we now skip through one file startup right through the GFC, we raised $1.4 million, never had any revenue. And I learned a lot from that. We can come back to it if you want. A very painful experience. We will come back
Oh,
to it
we're
actually.
coming back to that for sure. We're definitely going to come back to that one.
So we skipped the GFC. Effectively, we did a bit more software development for others up until effectively what became a more significant exit, which was, when I had a bit of time in between things, I accepted helping someone in one of the mines in Queensland with their planning a spreadsheet, right? And so just that act of helping someone through a connection and so on led to when that same mine was kicking off a very significant project with tens of millions of dollars of budget behind it to improve production in this particular mine. Then they called me and said if we wanted to develop basically a database now instead of Excel, replacing this behemoth of a spreadsheet with an actual database system, right? And they call it the planning database. And went to site, took some initial requirements. On the way back, pretty well said, we'll do it. You'll pay for it. We'll keep the IP. We'll take as long as it takes to get it right, and then we'll prioritize it. And that became a very successful business that to these days, is running and is now about a 25-person company. And I largely exited. I only kept a small amount of it, but yes. So never would I have guessed that helping someone in a mine site in Queensland with a massive spreadsheet that they just needed some, days or weeks of help with would land into that project, which will become effectively to this day my most significant exit.
So for our audiences, and we have two audiences typically, we have business owners that may have an idea or a problem that they're looking to solve, but they may not have the skills, capabilities, or the financial backing to execute it. And then our other side, we might have investors and new investors that are wanting to get involved, or they might have, if not money, they might have time, energy, focus, skill, capabilities that they can put to a project. I'd like to explore this a little bit more in the sense of they've come to you, they said that they want to replace the system. Now, some contractors out there would go, yep, that's fine. Here's the budget. And, they build it for them and they walk away. What I love about what you did was you said, okay, well, you can keep it. We'll retain the IP. And then you can go forth and on sell it or recreate it and so forth. But did you form a company with that organization or like a side company or was it negotiated that you would just be, stakeholder in some of the company? Walk me through how you kind of actually structured that.
Yeah. So some of my most heated conversations occurred during that period, right? When we're transitioning from being effectively this outsourced software developer for them after that mine having spent probably between sort of $1 to $2 million by then all up to develop the core technology to the point of transitioning to us on the back of that arrangement, transitioning to effectively a full-blown business and a startup of its own in the venture. So they didn't ask for any equity and so on. That was part of the original arrangement that we would retain the IP. We weren't trying to link it that way. Effectively, it was getting them to realize that they're not in the tech game. And by them doing this, what we could do is we could then, instead of them having to set up such a large budget for us to continue to customize the technology to their needs, we could leverage effectively the licensing fees that others will pay us once we're able to prioritize it. And so that was what underpinned them ultimately agreeing to go from that to a license, right? And then to this day, they're one of our most sort of significant customers in our, now we're all over the world and so on. But to this day, they absolutely launched this and they're a big part of everything that underpinned it. So it was about negotiating this through. And of course, though, there was an amount of friction whereby whereby basically they expected the licensing to actually grandfathered to a degree because they helped us to this day. They paid for a lot of the development. So I remember it was a very strategic thing, and I use this quite often with other founders, is negotiating that, it was a 3-year journey to get into parity to what we wanted to get paid as a fair license, but
Yeah.
negotiating that already. And so what it was is like the 3 years came and went. Nobody remembers, nobody thinks about it. It was so good, but it was, I see a lot of founders battling what it should be a fair license right now and thinking that it all ends in there. It's like, and I often say, no, 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 don't put that level of friction. Recognize what they've done for you. If you had a relationship like that, such a
Yeah.
special relationship, and take that into account and all that. And much more important is negotiate it for the long term. Negotiate, make sure that in that 3-year mark, if you want to use this as an example, they are parity by then. Because if you've done that, that's a massive achievement already. Then you put that contract behind and you start focusing on growing your own business. Before you know it, the 3 years went very quickly, and they were paying us a very healthy licensing fee.
So there's a couple key takeaways here I really want the audience to hear is that you essentially won the contract of building them something, but they funded you to start up your own company as well. Now we've seen this happen across multiple industries where say this, if not a mining company, say they're in a different game, let's say pharmaceuticals laboratories or something, and they brought in someone like yourself and they go, okay, great. We want a solution. We're willing to pay for that solution. We'll get a kind of a discount because we're funding your development and so forth, and that will be good for a period. Now, you can, as the investor or the builder, you could either choose to offer them no equity, and you say, well, you get a discount rate, or you can say, we're going to pay you. You're going to pay slightly higher and you're going to continue a payment or a contract over a period, but you're going to get equity from it. And the reason why you might do that is if they can make introductions across their industry to other people as well. So therefore, they become a value equity partner. And then I guess the third one is you could sell your product solution to them and they could want to pivot and go, you know what? I don't want to do pharmaceutical laboratories anymore. I actually want to get in the tech business. Now I got this thing and I think I can on-sell it across my industry. So there's lots of different avenues that as an investor, you can, I guess, pull levers or strings and decide where you want to go depending on what you want to do as well. What sort of timeframes do you typically work in your mind towards what projects you're going to build or companies going to form? And exit's great, and you've exited quite a few. What's in your mind when you're deciding which projects to take on?
It was honestly, I wish I had a great answer to that, Sean. It is very organic, right? So you assess based on the situation. Like this one incredible client for a period of time during the development phase, and so we had developed it, we had released it, and so on. But about 6 months in, it was all tools down for an indefinite amount of time. It ended up being about 3 or 4 months, but we couldn't have predicted that. And so because we were also doing software development for others, we just picked up that work. And then the window of time where they said tools down wasn't that long, so we were able to survive that. But ultimately, it's very random. What I would say to that is be adaptable is obvious, and so many people are doing it, right? So I'm not saying that it's sort of a unique insight, but when you find when you're in that moment, you can sort of hold to your guns, or you can adapt to the situation, right? And so be adaptable, resilient by all means. You have to have a certain amount of endurance, and yes, some situations you need to endure, but that adapting with the situation and not kind of going, oh well, that happened. I could have equally, for example, terminated my team, right? Instead of terminating my team, it was like, well, let's go and get other work, right? That sort of situation. So that kept us going, and we picked up. So I think it's just being adaptable. You spoke about many different ways of doing arrangements. So what I would say to that is effectively over time, I realized, and never done, I mentioned to you earlier in regards to other staff, having great people around me, never done it on my own. And that's equally true about clients and all that, that to be fair, most of our clients generally behave like partners to us rather than clients. And so
Yeah.
by now, I have an enormous sort of partnership bias. So where I can create a partnership as opposed to a transactional relationship, yeah, I would get a deal that is kind of worse for us. I would rather make less money out of a contract if it meant that you were actually doing that contract with a partner as opposed with a customer sort of relationship. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because partner
Yeah.
so much more scalable. Yeah.
I think that makes all the difference because inevitably, with every project you're working on and partnership or project you're working on, you're going to have some point of friction or point of, oh, sky's fallen. And that's not where you want to have that client customer relationship. That's or the client service provider relationship. That's where you want to partner, right? It's like, hey, I've got your back, you've got mine. We're in this together. How are we going to get through this? When I've looked at across all the different industries, I take your answer on how you make a decision. I think I have a little insight though, because you've done
Yes.
workforce management, you've done mining, you've done prop tech, you've done insurance, you've done finance, you've done so much. But the common element string between those is your tech background, and that's
No,
where I think is you're probably making a decision. Can I add real value? Is technology going to be able to really transform this solution? Would that be fair to say?
absolutely. Yep. Yep. Absolutely. To this day, doing things that are kind of people, sort of we're getting to some scale ups these days. So I'll tell you later about sort of how that journey is evolving. But even to that, it's got to be technology enabled sort of solution. So technology is obviously at the heart of it. That's how you get scale. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I'd like to ask about securing funding, because that's something where a lot of our entrepreneurs and business owners might find themselves. They might be pre-revenue, or they might be just in the startup phase, and they're looking for additional funding. Now, you've had a lot of different, I guess, experiences in that from the early beginnings to then going up to seed round funding. What would you say if someone was starting off first, instead of just going to the banks or borrowing from friends and family, or would you suggest that? How do you think you would best advise someone that's would like to kick
Yeah.
off and get something
Yeah.
started?
Yeah. 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 So, okay. So in 2025, as at the time of this recording, I think there's a bit of an expectation that you can create some sort of MVP, either because you have those skills yourself or because you have access to the network to get to an MVP, right? So getting to that stage, and by the way, the definition of an MVP that I would use is something where you can literally charge customers. It's not a proof of concept. It's not a clickable prototype. It's an MVP that might not have. You can say something.
Yeah, so minimum viable product for the
Correct.
listeners. Yeah. Yeah.
Correct. So it might not deliver, the entirety of the vision that the founder has, but it definitely is able to, to deliver enough value that customers are prepared to pay for it. So that I think by now is pretty well the expectation. You think about the way that tools with AI and there are some allowances. So for example, people are accepting, and some of these MVPs might be actually created through AI, something like Lovable, which is one of our portfolio companies, and so on. So it's accepted that might not be an enterprise ready sort of solution. And by the way, there's about 3 stages of technology. By the time that we know that technology, we can get back to you in any case. But back to the MVP stage, effectively, that's pretty well an expectations this day. And then because the barriers to entry have lowered so much that you should be able to do an MVP within thousands or tens of thousands realistically these days, right? Again, it depends. Sometimes some MVPs go into the hundreds of thousands. That's okay, right? That's
Yeah.
fine. What I'm saying is it should be pretty accessible. So as much as possible, you want to do those things within your own steam. That's my bias. That's what I would like to see when someone comes to see me. So if instead of that, I have a founder that is not prepared to move pen, to move literally to shift the pen from one side of the desk to the other, to say
Yeah.
something, before getting funded, well, that's just someone that is basically largely putting all this risk on the investors without really they themselves starting to risk anything. Yeah. And
Yeah.
so one way or the other, you expect that equation, and that equation is not all on the investor side. Now, if you want to do that, if you want to go really, really, really early, then my preferred route these days is going into programs such as StatMate, Antler, and so on. So a combination of accelerators or incubators that can help in that really early stage where their processes enable taking generally like really early stage risk, right? But other than that, even with other people's money, even family and friends' money, I would probably will encourage founders to try to get their ideas as far as they can possibly can on their own, which is what we call bootstrapped.
Yeah, I like that. So what was the two programs that you mentioned in terms
Yeah,
of incubators?
StartMate
Oh
and
yeah.
Antler, and we investors in both.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so th those are great because they actually give you access to other things like a network and expertise as well. So for someone who's got only an idea, maybe doesn't have the business acumen or experience or skill and kind of needs a mentorship, I would recommend those type of programs because you're getting so much more. But I think the MVP is a really good and suggestion to have because as someone who has an idea, what you're actually wondering in the back of your mind as a human is it any good? I mean, is it going to work? And the best way you can know that is actually by building something, the minimum viable product, and taking it and selling to someone. If you sell it to one person, you're on your way. And with, as you mentioned, with AI and automation, I forget the one you mentioned, but Replit. Yeah, there's how
Um,
many? Sorry, which
yeah,
one?
lovable.
Lovable. There's so many different platforms that you can get something up and going. Now, I wouldn't build my whole foundation of business around them, but
Gotcha.
in terms of an MVP and getting something out there, at least to product description and getting it to a sale point, and then maybe using that money to reinvest the actual build, I guess that could be a way of doing that. Is that I wanted to ask you, in the beginning of your journey, did you set up an MVP first before developing a team, or did you secure funding because of that project funding you had? Like, what
Yeah,
were the
yeah.
stages where you moved, I guess, from getting paid for project to selling an idea off an MVP and then self-funding your own or others? How does that
Yeah.
look?
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So we had seed funding early and the team to execute. On hindsight, I think the team was actually pretty incredible. So we were achieving a lot of things, but I think now that I deal with a lot of other teams, I just realize even more just how good the team was. But anyway, so did we do MVPs? Ultimately, yes, yes, we did. So by which I mean that we didn't release these enormous systems, even though over time and after many millions of dollars and many years of time, they became much bigger systems and much more mature. But very much, yes, we did have that MVP strategy of, within a few months, let's get out there. Now we were lucky to have the funding because as after finance now, we by then we had one of the founders was a ex-director of Westpac Bank, myself as a bit of a techie at the time, again about mid 20s by the way, and then another co-founder again very experienced. So I had basically it was three of us, two very senior people and all that. So we had that pedigree that we were able to raise money through the GFC. But if you don't have the money, it's okay to do something even more scrappy, right? So MVPs can have different definitions. So in 2025, I would define it as a product that you can charge for, and it's okay if you use a low code, some sort of generative AI solution to get that MVP out. The other thing that I would say, for example, we are sort of moving a lot of upstream. We're starting to deal with businesses sort of $5 million in revenue plus, right? So that's the way that our direction is taking us now. And so what I'm seeing at that scale is the struggle seems to be if the business didn't get to redo the technology, there is oftentimes this difficulty within the investor base, sometimes the founder or the tech team, or a combination of those three, that are really grappling with the idea that they have to redo their technology. So the thing that I've done now twice is be a strong voice within these organizations when they have the fear of redoing the tech. And so it's educating them that, and the way that I say it is very simply, no system that you would use today that you know by name is effectively the first version of that system. And we're not talking about significant like rebuilds of it, right? So we're talking about two to probably 3+ iterations where oftentimes involves very large or complete rewrites. So why you fear? Because why are you fearing this decision that seems scary? Like, wow, we've been building this technology for 5 years now. The idea of redeveloping it is crazy. But why do you fear that? When just about no solution that you're using today is that first version, you know what I mean? That launched, some 10 years prior or whatever. So if you're not using those things, those are the technologies that achieve any scale, why are you trying to achieve scale with this first version of your technology to say something that you just kept on enhancing, but never really rewriting and never sort of fundamentally addressing the new, the new scale needs of this technology. So I don't know, oftentimes what you end up with is onboarding is really difficult. Or I remember being in a meeting where the CTO but basically was going, need after need after need, like, needs for the technology, right? So these requirements that he had for the technology, all of those would be table stake stuff. All of them was just, billing, onboarding, reporting, integrations, all these things that you would get largely out of a mature MVP. Now, like you would have, if you get a good team together, they probably release that as a mature MVP now with sub $500,000, right? He was talking about all of that as enhancements to the existing technology. And my palms were getting sweaty at that meeting because his budget was about I think it was about sort of $4 to about $7 million, what he was saying. So not only the budget was crazy, everything he was talking about was table stakes. And so I literally took the founder out for dinner the next night, and I said, "Hey, do you realize that we gotta throw away what you got and we gotta re-implement it all? And let me bring in the teams and all that can help you do all that, right?" And so yeah, that ended up being about $1 million project to do that job, but it's got to be done. The fact you've been going for 8 years on the back of effectively the first version of the system that you just kept on improving, but never really rewriting, is already incredible. So why would you expect it to grow, the next 10x on the back of that?
Yeah, nobody would want to use 1980s version of Microsoft Office on the computers nowadays, right? And I think the fear for many people is that the fear of the unknown and the fear of letting go of what they built and thinking that if it's forever erased, then nothing will be able to replace it. But it's just fear-based, right? And I guess you never release something until or switch off one system and release another one until you're absolutely, well, 90% plus certain that it was going to be great. So,
All sorts of things. Getting new customers into the new one. If the new one, for example, doesn't have feature parity, which means it can do as much as the old system,
yeah.
start bringing new customers. New customers don't have the same hurdles that the old ones did, right, in terms of the requirements. And then spend another year bringing to full feature parity, but bring them into a system that, for example, out of the box is complete self-service, which in 2025 is no longer a mystery. This is basically the very clear playbooks for that. You can do
Yeah.
that with an average team. You don't even need to be an A+ team. You can be an average team and deliver a great MVP that has all those things out of the box. Yeah, and so that's a great strategy. Then slowly transitioning customers in from the old one to the new one, right? And the other reason is if it would, like, let's say you had this incredible team that developed the most amazing technology. Even then, I don't think you can avoid it. And I'll tell you why, Sean, because effectively what happens is fundamentally the technology, the underlying technology is changing. Think about internet, right? Think about cloud, think about mobile, think about AI. Think it makes sense. So all these things fundamentally they're shifting technology. in
Yeah,
its
well, COVID did that for many businesses that didn't want to move to cloud-based systems. They're sitting on systems that were 10, 15 years old and they didn't want to go cloud-based. And but overnight they had to because of COVID and everything changed
Yeah.
on how businesses were going to be doing business.
So
Yeah.
fear not, it's perfectly okay to redo
Yeah.
a system.
You mentioned some before. You're working now with ideal clients of turning over 5 million revenue or more. On that particular case that you gave, it was $1 million project. Do you have a ratio of, I believe that you shouldn't invest $1 unless you're getting 10 times back. In today's world of AI and automation, it should be 100 times back. But do you have I guess it depends on the cost to acquire a customer, cost per
Yeah.
customer, revenue, and if it's subscription or one-off price-based model. But is there kind of a ratio that you typically use for investment?
No, it's mainly, I suppose. I wish I had a heuristic like that. I don't. Effectively, what we're looking at is do you have a model and then put in this cost into your forecast effectively, right? So can you afford to do this or not? Do you need to raise for that or whatever? So something like that. I don't have a heuristic that I use generally. When you're talking about big budgets like that, probably. A heuristic like that could probably get on the way and potentially advising someone, ill advising someone. So
Yeah.
I would take a measured approach of understanding really whether you can embark on a project like that. Yeah.
So the questions, I guess, in the discovery, when you're having the initial conversations, it's not just about tell me about your problem, but it's really understanding about the business and their revenue path, their runways, the cost to acquire, the revenue per customer, monthly subscription versus one-off. All these different things, I guess, you need to take in consideration when building a business case for that business to say, well, it might cost this, but you're going to save on efficiency in labor, here, and or you're going to attract more customers here, and that's going to drive your revenue line here, and your profitability combined will be here. Do you take it to that level when you're working with your clients?
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Has there been any times where you've pitched an offer like that and it seemed like a high no-brainer to you, but they, for whatever reason, and whether you know it today or not, that they just could not get over that hurdle?
Uh, I'm sure that would have been the case. And that, funny enough, it was in a business that I was very close to. That comes to mind. That I won't name names. That's the case to this day. But in general, I can say I have a very high success rate in terms of getting through. And it might just be it's a function really of time. It's how much time do you have to walk people through that journey. And the other thing that I find is boards are the biggest struggle. They do
Yeah.
not get it, in my experience. So I found founders get it. So it's between sort of the worst of boards, then the tech teams, because they kind of projected themselves into that technology. And so to them, it's like, you might as well be talking about them.
You're messing in my kitchen. Yeah. Yeah.
and then founders are probably the easiest one to do because they're dealing with this. To them, it's a daily sort of hassle. If a system is now if a business sort of outgrown their own technology, then it becomes a pretty obvious thing to be looking at. Yeah, but over time, I think you just work through the layers, and people come around to it. I think, and
Yeah.
then
I
yeah,
like,
it's
I
exciting.
like
And the
that.
other side of it, it's really exciting to do.
Yeah.
Right?
But I love how, founders and the investors can get really excited, but you've identified the roadblockers and decision-making processes, or effectively, if they're not part of the decision-making process, they can still be working against the vision if they don't subscribe to it. I've seen it before in other companies as well. Yeah. So if you don't have the tech team on board and that you're going to be working with or integrating or with, that can certainly cause a roadblock. If you have some strong, I guess, opinions and minds and egos on boards, that can certainly do it. And I guess understanding who other key stakeholders and influencers within the business could be driving the founders' decisions or curving
Yeah,
them would be absolutely important as well.
yeah, and you also need to bring around your customers as well for that journey, and that even goes through the new build phase. There's therefore you can leverage your customers to to guide you and so on as well. Yeah.
Well, if anything, I think you'd use that as the kryptonite, wouldn't you? Because ultimately, that's what matters most is the customers and their satisfaction. And if the problem has seen the light of day, it's probably been because the customers have been asking for it, or they desperately need it. So if you use that as your anchor point, I think you're setting yourself up for success.
Yeah. Yeah. The framing there is not saying to the customer, what do you want, but is rather what are your challenges, right? So going back to those basics, almost as if you were day one and, assessing, again, right now, what are your challenges? And so then you create a system around those rather than saying, just to give you a ridiculous example, where do I place this button? None of that.
Yeah,
But
yeah. Don't need the UX. I mean,
yeah.
Steve Jobs did say that, they want what I tell them they want. And I think it was Henry Ford that said if I asked their clients what they wanted, customers what they wanted, they'd said faster horses. So yeah, I take it that you still have that ownership there for yourself. There was a question I was going to ask you. Oh yeah, it was about the exiting process. All right.
Yes.
So first, our audience who are business owners, entrepreneurs, they might have bricks and mortar businesses or an online business, and they're looking to exit. How do you actually list your business for sale, or did you start your business with a potential buyer in mind? Like, walk me through that process because you've exited. Sorry, was it four or six?
Four, four.
Four
Yeah, yeah. So,
businesses.
okay. So the SME exits, so there were three SME exits and one startup exit. And so the three SME exits were very simple for me. They were small, they were quick, and they were simple to do. So if you remember, I mentioned my very first one was my 50% of AA Brothers to my brother. And so that was just a few discussions and settling on something that was very practical, so that he could have 100% of his business and destiny and so on, and I would continue in a different path. So that was the first one. The other ones were a bit more commercial. So the other exit was, I suppose, I've done a couple whereby when I was done with the software development business and I could see that there was another startup that was taking momentum and I wanted to take, the team and myself behind that other initiative, I would often, instead of just, let that business go idle and do nothing, is selling that business off. And that was basically software development businesses. And so that again, I did it very practically with one was an employee that wanted to continue on. And look, he's running it to this day, right? And the way that I've done that mini exit was basically I said, well, look, for the next 3 years, we'll agree that you'll pay me this share of your profit. And so and not revenue, but profit rather. So we could basically share the upside, share the risk. And yeah, it was a 3-year payout on those customers that he took on. So he took on customers. He had to basically, make less profit for a few years, but then I think it's been nearly about 10 years since I'd done that particular transaction. So he kept a 10-year long business on the back of that. And I was able to pass on those customers. So the customers themselves didn't feel much pain.
So with that particular situation, I guess the skills around the negotiation is, well, how much percentage would it be that I can feel that I'm getting my value in selling it to you and that it's securing me for 3 years, they'll give me this, that's the amount, but it's not so low that I feel like, oh, I'm just giving it away. And for the other
Exactly.
person, it's not so much that I feel like I'm not making any profit because I still want
Exactly.
some sort of quality of life. So
Exactly.
I guess that would be an interesting one. So for some bricks and mortar businesses, it might be 5% to 20% of all revenue, or and
Well, it
for
was
and some of
profit.
them might be too
It was
high.
profit, and it was something
Profit.
like one third, two thirds. So I was taking one third of the profit. They were taking two thirds of the profit. Yeah.
I like that. Did you have to rely on bit of, I guess the benefit of you being in the business, you know what the profitability P&L statements were kind of looking like, but would there be an honor system or did you get lawyers or accountants involved and just have it kind of arranged that way so it's kind of silently done and you didn't have to worry about it?
Exactly. It was very much not quite a handshake, but not too far from it. Highly trusted relationship. We had been working together for a long time. It was incredibly amiable. It was basically enabling. And this is the other thing. We spend all this time in contracts and arrangements and all that. And really, what stands and what things go down based on how people behave, not in what's written in a contract, right? The contract comes out when people misbehave.
Yeah, right.
And
Yeah.
so, if you're working with people that behave adequately, most of the time you're fine. And because we were talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars anyway, it was, it's not worth it. The math doesn't add up to spend a lot of the time. It was much more effective. Like my business was going really, great anyway. I had to move on to do other things. That was my focus. So just, so much more effective to just on the back of a few meetings, sort it out, move on, do the arrangement, focus on everybody just, going forward. So I think I was very practical on that one. The third one was a portfolio of clients, about 120 clients that I acquired very quickly within a week. And the person that missed out from that is who I sold it to a year later. And I think I made about 30% or so margin on that one. So they still were, hot to trot because they didn't get to buy this portfolio of 120 customers. We got rid of a whole lot of customers that really wasn't worthwhile servicing. So we went to about 85, I think. We went to about 85 customers and we were actually making money, right? So I sort of improved it, polished that portfolio of customers, and then sold it to the person that missed out. And that was great as well because that too was about a 2-week sale process.
2 weeks.
Yeah, 2 weeks. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So with
and hundreds of thousands. These were all these transactions initially. They were just hundreds of thousands each in value. But I call them my apprenticeship. Is this realization that for business people want to pay money, right? And that you're creating value and so on. So it gave me some sort of confidence. So by the time it came to my significant exit in 2018, and that itself was a 2.5-year journey. So go from weeks to years, right? But it was a very healthy sale, right? Where by the time I walked away from that business, it was done as what is called a secondary sale. Effectively, I sold part of my equity, but the business itself didn't exit. And so that was a 2.5-year journey from talking to my co-founder at the time, which by the way, he's coming to stay with us tonight. So we'll be reconnecting with him a bit. So sort of talking to my co-founder on the back of a skiing trip where I say, hey, mate, I want to realize a lot of the value that we created to this day. I'm not running away or anything like that, but just letting you know, and let's go through this journey. And it was about 2.5 years from that discussion. Would have been about 2016, if I think about the timing, to about 2018, where I actually made it happen. But it was
that was CommitWorks.
That was CommitWorks, yeah. And so we brought in private equity and a couple more family offices and all that. So we had it very well resourced. We hired a whole lot of people to sort of properly do what I could never do properly as one individual, but there was a whole team that came behind it and so on. And so that was the perfect time. We moved the office from Newcastle to Brisbane. And so, yeah.
So you built a foundation, you kind of ramped it up, you scaled it up to make it a more attractive exit as well. So there's a bit of initial investment, but you got a private equity firm involved?
Yeah.
Okay. So that allowed you to broaden out, relocate, expand your audience, and then increase the value off of what was already 5 years of an existing business. So it was showing well tracked and documented growth, and then in a whole nother layer, people get excited. Yeah, I want to be a part of that, and then you're able to maximize that.
Yeah, we were looking at no less than 100% growth year on year. We had for those sort of 5 years, and so yeah.
That's awesome. Now, when you brought in the private, I have two questions, so I don't want to forget the other one. But when you brought in the private equity firm, so you had to negotiate equity on that one as well, or was it like how was that? And
Yeah. By the way, it wasn't me personally. It was again a team effort. Let me be clear.
yeah.
But so effectively, when we went for the race, effectively we ended up landing a private equity firm and also a family office as well. So it was a great sort of mix there. So there's actually 2 family offices and a private equity firm, all with board positions and so on. So your question was around, effectively what it was is at the start of that journey, I was still about 60% of the cap table. So I was a 60% owner as I founded the business originally. So so it didn't make sense to me or anyone else, for that matter, that, well, everyone just would be working for me. So let's say I diluted down to 45%. Why
Yeah.
would anyone else, with me not in the picture? I already knew that I wanted to do other things. And so why would I still have 45% of the business? So it was very logical for me to also do this secondary and sell down so that I could create room for others on the cap table. So part of the funding that came into the business wasn't all for the business. Part of that funding got redirected to buying some of my equity.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, it's a pay to play model. If you want to be part of it, then I'll reduce my share down. Okay, that's good. And then everybody would go, okay, so we have this new partner that's coming on board, but they're going to help us get to the next level, so it makes sense.
Yeah.
And did they have to vote on that, or is it because you're the majority shareholder, you could just pass it, or
Look, it was unanimous. There was not
yeah.
much of that. It was such a considered thing that we were doing, and of course, there were conversations, around, like, why do you want to exit a business that is growing like this, and all these kind of things, and you just take people through a journey, no different to the previous discussions we have, and getting, making people comfortable that yeah, the technology stands and the clients stand, and that again, it was at the 18-year mark that I had to leave that team behind, right in
Yeah.
2018. And so I could do this, but for the first time, I was kind of teamless after that. And to this day, that is so hard, because, yeah, 7 years on, and I'm still building sort of team around us in different capacities and different things that we're doing now. And what I do shifted completely now. Now I'm basically a full-time investor in some capacity or another. So that shifted considerably. But not having a team for the first time since 2018 has been an incredible ride as well. Yeah.
So the question I didn't want to forget was around evaluation, and we'll come back to that in a minute. But I guess it's a good segue because that was the last time you ran teams and so forth, and now you become an investor. That must have been a bit of a mind shift for you.
Yep, yep. It was. I did two more startups after CommitWorks. They flopped. Jesus, we can do an entire episode on that one.
We
It was
might,
a transport technology in Chile, on the other side of the world. So I'll
right?
leave it at that. But yeah, so it was very big, and ultimately you slowly become that. You slowly become that investor. What I really wanted to do was back the next wave of founders. So was the stuff that I've done till then, might seem whatever exciting or whatever. I often say is like a lot of getting your bum kicked and getting back up. So being resilient, having great people around you, that sort of thing. There's not great insights that I could at least draw from it. And now, what happens in 2018, and I think that authentically, kind of my connections have developed a lot since, from being a founder to sort of putting the investor hat on, and so by now I have a great network, and so I often leverage my network a lot. And through a combination of that, as I mentioned, that partnership bias that I have, then being able to do some incredible things that I'm very proud of, especially in the last couple of years. Like our portfolio in Unified Fund of Funds is about 170 startups, the underlying portfolio, over
Wow.
7 funds and 5 managers. So yeah,
Wow, that's massive.
so it's pretty good. And then look, and 70% of the capital comes from Newcastle, where we're from. So that Newcastle is a couple of hours north of Sydney. So this is capital that wouldn't have made it to venture if we sort of didn't bring them around to do that together. And yeah, so really, it's not easy, but I think we're making a difference.
Yeah,
Right.
Newcastle is certainly well on the map. University of Newcastle is leading technology like no other out there. And I'm only south of Newcastle. I'm on Central Coast, and I love visiting Newcastle and seeing it. It's coming along every time I visit.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask with because you're an investor, but you also work at an advisory board
Yes.
and a venture partner as well. Is there, what are the pros and cons of being just an investor
Yeah.
versus being part of an advisory board? And how do you kind of cut that line? I'm only assuming here, but you're not an operational director, but you're investor, you're invested. So you could have a right to say or have an opinion on some things, but there's probably a line where you go, "Oh, I said my piece, but it's beyond me now." Like, how do you
Yeah.
navigate all that? And do you have a preference of being just a silent investor or advisory?
Yeah. We're quite flexible. Different arrangements require different things. There's a particular scale up that I can't sort of name because the announcement hasn't been made, but we effectively, with that particular business, we ended up launching four initiatives. And interestingly, all those four initiatives were able to be done without us having to be necessarily involved at a board level. Why? This scale up is absolutely, is absolutely flying. They don't need us at the board level. That's one thing. They don't want to bring people at the board level, so they don't need us and they don't want it. So that makes perfect sense to us. But that
Yeah.
was a deal breaker, right? Because and the four initiatives were to demystify that effectively was we raised alongside a pretty significant round that they're doing at the moment. So we raised capital through our syndicate. So what we do in Unify is the Unify Fund of Funds effectively has no fees. It's a zero on zero fund of funds. We use that to give us access to a portfolio of startups and access to an ecosystem in terms of the startup ecosystem. And that's
Yeah.
kind of it, right? We make a little bit of money from carry, that sort of thing, from some of our funds, not all, but that's kind of just to pay back for that initiative. So that's that. Then what we have is we have a syndicate that now we think has pretty unfair access to some really great opportunities from the Australian ecosystem. And that's how we got some fees on that syndicate. It's still pretty modest, but we got some fees in there. And so it was that syndicate that we used to come and raise capital alongside this scale up that I mentioned before. Then we brought in an acquisition target through a 10-year relationship of mine. And so when we were racing for this particular scale up, I reached out to my network. I say to this potential investor, hey, I know you love this kind of business. I can't even talk about the industry, but I know you love this industry. Do you have any conflicts? And I said, look, absolutely, we have a conflict. We heavily invested in the most direct competitor. Do you just want to mash them up? And so that conversation led into an acquisition and to a very much what we should be closing in the next few weeks.
Oh, wow.
And then the other two were basically partnership initiatives that we launched as well. And so effectively, one scale up four initiatives. And some of these partnership initiatives, we're talking about significant for both sides, the scale up and the partner coming in. And so, so that's an example of how it's almost like the perfect example. I can't think of a better example whereby we've been able to do it without going to even directorship level. In other businesses, they very much need the help and want the help. And so you make a decision that, you're willing for that business that makes sense to come into directorship level and almost everything in between. So there's sometimes your advisory, So effectively, I think we got around about sort of 7 positions at the moment, give or take, in different capacities, from directors through to just enablers from our portfolio.
I like that, enablers or directors and everything in between. Through your syndicates, how did you come across the ideas? Do you have a platform where people lodge their ideas, or is it just people just know to talk to you and your
Yeah.
network, or um, yeah,
Yeah. So for that syndicate is very much for the next layer up. That's why we move into that sort of $5 million plus. So we're looking for those businesses that quickly got themselves to that position. Often happens organically, but sometimes inorganically. And by that, I mean organically would be that you're selling a product.
yeah,
Inorganically would be that you acquire businesses that give you that revenue. And so it's happening in a couple of different ways. And sometimes the combination of the two. And that's probably the most powerful one.
yeah, okay,
But effectively we're looking for businesses that quickly, and by quickly we meant within a few years, get themselves in that situation of multi-million dollar situations. And ideally, like I think we got, what do we got? We got 5, 14, 30 mil. So is that sort of stuff, probably another one of 30 mil. So yeah, so we're looking at that sort of, for us, it's sort of that 5 million that's probably at the bottom. What I was noticing is that we can put just as much effort into a business that didn't have that revenue, but the scope was not there. So I could say we should do X. And yes, we could do X, but we didn't have the resources to do X. And so what I'm noticing is that in the bigger businesses, the same, hey, let's do X. It's like, yeah, yes, we could do it. Yeah, let's do X. And
Let's
maybe,
pull it from here. We got the resources or we got
yes.
the backing. Yeah.
Yeah. So what I'm noticing, the same network, the same ideas, the same effort has a much greater yield. And that's kind of why we're moving there. And that's okay. We're comfortable in doing that. We don't believe that we're letting anyone down, because I think we're still playing at early stage and all that through the fund of funds and helping the ecosystem that way, of which we deployed millions of dollars that way, right? So we're happy that we're doing our bit for the early stage. We very much believe in, and you need that to occur, because it's only through that ideation, through to formation of a business, that you actually get the scale ups. If you don't invest at that level, you then don't get the scale ups on the other side, right? So we're happy that we planted those seeds, but we're probably more on a bit of sort of a, these trees are now growing and starting to bring some fruits, and we're starting to harvest some of those, Yeah.
Awesome. Now we're going to wrap up shortly, and we've just got a couple of things I want to do before we wrap up. But one question I did want to ask is talking about valuation. So depending on industry, size of business, and so forth, a bricks and mortar business, I know I was talking to recently, they were like 1.5 times the profit of their annual profit was a multiplier. Whereas one tech business I was talking to, they were saying, oh, I was attracting offers of 6 times, 8 times, even 12 times my annual revenue, which,
Yeah.
there's a vast degree there. How do you actually work out valuation of a company?
Yeah. Okay. Important things. Yes. Are you a brick and mortar business? Are you startup, scale up, whatever, right? So there's obviously completely different methodologies, and what you're describing before is basically a multiple of EBITDA, typically, or profit, and that's quite normal for a brick and mortar business. Now, 1.5 times, I would say, is a business that doesn't have a significant moat, probably has few clients as opposed to a lot of clients. Maybe it doesn't have recurring revenue versus a business with recurring revenue. And some of the most recurring revenue, like waste management, it's a recurring revenue business, right? You're selling you pick up bins from businesses around a city, right? It's got a recurring revenue model, and so but doesn't attract the multiples because it's boring and nobody wants to do it. and so great sort of business if you want to do that sort of space. But then you start looking at startups, and then you have to look at the reason why your what valuation. I think is first you need to, are you valuing the business because you're raising capital, or because you're trying to sell it, or even you're trying to sort of fire sale, right? So there's all these different things. Like
The
some
motivator.
the business at nothing because we're trying to recapitalize the business, right? So there's been a few times when the business, a year prior it was a $10 million business. Now, right now, we're valuing it at almost nothing because we're running out of money and we need to recapitalize it on a fire sale. So, but that was a year ago. That was a $10 million business, right? So valuations are very subjective, and I'm giving you an extreme example to tell you what kind of that isn't a fixed thing, right? And methodologies, you can look it up on the web. There's a number of different methodologies, but the big themes that I notice is where's the company at, how fast are they growing. So growth rates, which we call a CAGR. So CAGR is incredibly important. You can have two $5 million businesses, but one growing at a CAGR or say 15% year on year, the other one growing at a CAGR of 200% year on year. And
Oh, you got that one. Yeah.
you think is going to attract the frothy valuation, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, so two $5 million businesses aren't the same, right? Even if they're both software, even if they both whatever, both got a bit of AI or whatever, doesn't matter. What you're prepared to pay for that is not the same. So what else was going to say? So yeah, and the other one is because like they're saying the reason. So because typically one thing I definitely observe is definitely true that the valuation you would give a business to raise capital for when you're trying to manage dilution and you have comparables and that sort of stuff to go by to value that business, will not be the same of considering your exit valuation, because in your exit valuation is ultimately, valued whatever the buyer wants to pay for it. And that's an obvious thing to say, but it's never truer when you're trying to exit, because it's that buyer or those buyers that will effectively, accept or reject your valuation. And so how can you help evaluation in an exit? The drivers are things like, is there any competitive tension? How strategic is this exit? Is this an international investor? For example, if you sell to an international business, typically in the US, just by that action alone, you're likely to have a higher exit than you would to sell to an Australian equivalent of that same acquirer, right? So how strategic is it? What is it going to do? What is the business going to do inside of that other business? There's a really simple thing of, a business trading at 10 times multiple or 20 times multiple, buying a business at 8 times multiple. Well, the minute they've done that, that same revenue is worth 20 times on that business. Why wouldn't they buy you at 8 times? So that makes complete sense to them. And on your side, you go, holy dooly, how did they pay 8 times for my business? So those are the things that I'm noticing really drive the valuation discussion more than what is the method. Makes sense? Is the method is more probably a function of what is the situation, and I will be thinking about your situation. And those are the first things that I will think to influence, if you can influence anything at all. So if you can decide, would I sell to an Australian buyer? Would I sell to a US buyer? Well, statistically speaking, probabilistically speaking, a US buyer will pay you more for that same asset. So if you can make a decision about that, and you think you've got a network in the US that can potentially look at buying your business, then they're likely to be a better buyer of your business, right?
So there's a really good hint. Expand your network in the US if you're in business, regardless of what stage you're at for the future.
One example, yeah. But hopefully I'm not avoiding. I'm trying to give you broader context rather than trying to answer in a niche, in a narrow way. Yeah.
No, it's actually really insightful, because I hadn't thought about that one. Sometimes I think I've been pigeonholing it to the IP, the solution, the customer journey only, where really these things, and especially with technology businesses, can be adopted all over the world. And that's about the value of what you're bringing, and then who's willing to pay for it. I wanted to ask, with if surrounding yourself with the right people, getting to revenue as quick as possible, and having, a point of difference is important. Is there anything out of your playbook you would do to help force or encourage adoption of the market? Because without the customers, as you said, they're the ones that are determining how much they're willing to pay for it and take it on. But when you're doing these startups, adoption is hugely important. Do you allocate a percentage of revenue to remarketing, or is it like, how much of that is your strategy in the beginning?
Yeah. So I will give you the caveat that sales and marketing is not my pedigree, right? So it's
Yeah.
not where I excel at all. What I do, I know what good looks like, but I'm not good at it. And so what I often do for founders is help them see when they haven't got a good sales and marketing team, but I'm then not necessarily that helpful at helping them solve it. So can I say that completely honestly? And I often declare this to the founders themselves, right? But then I know what good looks like, and say, oh, that's not good. And
Yeah.
let me see what I can do. How can I leverage my network to people that really know the space? So that's how I will tackle a founder. If I sort of reframe a little bit what you asked me as if it was coming from a founder, that would be my caveats, right, to the founder.
Yeah.
Another observation is, out of anything that you can do, like what I was saying to someone just a couple of weeks ago, I was saying to them, that about 9 out of 10 founders, I reckon, could use help in sales/marketing. And by that, I mean, not just help us in, hey, like put me on this retainer and I'll see what I can do for your situation, and or let me put you through this course or anything like that. But actually, help selling, which could be a combination. It actually can happen in 3 ways. Sell for the founder, very difficult, but if they could, amazing. Like open doors, and that could be like, I'm going to call it open doors, exactly. So let's imagine someone that had connections with corporates that have genuine needs and all that. Because what happens to corporates, they got the resources, they got the teams, they got the money, all that kind of stuff. They got the customers, but oftentimes they don't have the innovation and they can't move quickly and all that. And that's what the startup can bring. That's why I love that sort of dynamic sort of startup, very nimble, that can innovate, and then pairing them up with very large organizations that have a genuine need. So, and doing something in partnership or as a customer or whatever. So it's people that can open doors into large organizations where founders will spend sometimes months or years trying to get access to those same customers. So that's really helpful. And the best way to do that is to, if you're a door opener in that way, is to sort of declare and be very, very thematic about it. I got these connections. If I tell these connections to look at your product, they will. Hit me up if I can open those doors. If that's really your position, that's really, really valuable. And then the other one was more like true kind of partnerships. Are you someone that can help find you unlock partnerships? And sometimes they might not be your customer, but maybe they channel to that customer. And so those are the three ways. And I reckon that if people going into a founder that can do any one of those three things well, I reckon 9 out of 10 founders will do something about it and will execute on that because they need it. They need it kind of desperately. Few founders, it's very, very rare, where I talk to a founder that says, I cannot keep up. I cannot keep up with the demand. And then back to your questions, we typically as an investor, that's what you want as an investor. That's the startup that you want to invest in because they cannot keep up and you want your money to be used for that growth. That brings us back to that's why so few companies are truly at that stage that for us, they're highly investable, right?
Yeah, so it's so funny. It's the ones that don't need your investment. It's the ones you want to invest the most. You don't want a founder to say, I can't keep up because of inability or capability, but because there's so many customers. I love that. What industries or opportunities do you see, for the immediate next 3 to 5 years or 18 months even that grabbed your interest and what are keeping one eye on the horizon?
Yeah, pretty boring. I think SaaS has still got such a large footprint. It is shifting a little bit of outcome space because of AI. So now I say, well, you're not just a system of record. Now you're starting to do work for your customers, and
Yeah.
you're generally taking work away from your customers, not just because it's quicker, but because in some cases you might not need that resource, that human resource anymore. So I think so. SaaS. So with the caveat that SaaS is shifting to that sort of outcome-based licensing that you can start to do, but still, if you call it SaaS for, hey, we're a bit of software in an organization, then and should we call that enterprise B2B SaaS? So I still think that there's still so much happening around that. Okay, so now and what I mean by that is that yes, AI is really hot, but what inevitably is going to happen is that it's really difficult to understand who are going to be the winners and the losers and all that sort of stuff. So you have a very almost like binary probability of landing an 100x at the moment or 1,000x business, or very likely, I think that's probably a very small chance of lending something like that as an investment, and then a very high chance of just a complete write-off. And so because these days we manage other people's money and so on, we're a lot more hesitant to do those kind of bets now. We rather like to find the proof points, like to find businesses with recurring revenues and also stuff. And at the moment in Australia, that's currently on the back of typically SaaS businesses that are morphing into AI businesses, but they already got hundreds, if not thousands, of customers. And so that transition, actually, for me, I kind of love to see because they already got a captive audience of customers that they can sell that to, and they should be able to quadruple their revenue and help the customer literally be more profitable. So feels like everybody's winning. And so those are the things that we're finding really interesting. Then, of course, deep tech, where the technology itself is still a barrier to entry. So that's also really exciting. And why? Because it's really hard to replicate those businesses. At the moment, hardware is still really hard. Mel Ventures like to say, hardware is the new software, meaning that software was difficult to do, 15, 20, 30 years ago. Now that's still the case with hardware. It's becoming easier all the time, but there's still a lot of barriers to entry. And so hardware businesses really have a really interesting moat. So if they got enough technology in them that is hard to replicate, then just the fact that they're a deep tech business creates a sort of really interesting moat about them, and so we find them very backable as well.
Yeah, I love that. You give me some things to think about. I was wondering, who's going to be the win because a lot of people want outcome solutions, and I look at software, and there's so many people that only use 20% of what the software could deliver,
Yep.
because they're only interested in that 20% solution. So is it going to be the app store that wins? That one specific thing that people are looking for, which is what they're willing to buy, and only for a short period until they solve it, I guess. Um,
Yep.
that brings us to our final segment,
Okay.
where we talk about AI idea of the day. And as an investor, this one's called Health Echo. And so the premise of this one is about an app. Most fitness apps, there's some great ones out there. MyFitnessPal, Ladder's pretty cool. They have your regime, and some have diet and tracking and so forth, and that's all fine. But what none of them really do well is they don't take in consideration the human element, where, as someone who's been on and off the fitness regime myself quite a few times, the things that put me off the wagon are, school holidays. All of a sudden the kids are here, or away on holidays, or weekends, and where normally I'd be intermittent fasting when I'm just working from home, but now I'm at a buffet conference and I'm having 3 buffets a day. So all these things. So Echo Health is about tracking your day-to-day activities and just checking in where you're at, and then revising your routines or giving you more in the moment
Yep.
capabilities and strength. What do you think? It would be an app, mobile app. What do you think in terms of concept?
So on that particular idea, what do I think
Yeah,
about it?
yeah,
Um, okay, so I have to go on personal experience. So I've been extremely lucky that my wife is my training buddy.
yeah,
And so for me, and I think what got me to persist through exercise and so on was that that connection, that body, right? So I would say, if there's an element of that, because it's in a way it's an accountability, right? So it's a lot easier to ignore a system and whatever, a routine, whatever, a diary, than it is to kind of to go with others, right? I'll give you another example. Um, Out of a stabmate, Michael Batko, we just call him Batko, effectively. So he's spun off Startup Striders and runs all throughout Australia, and is effectively where runs alongside Parkrun. Are you aware of the Parkrun?
yep, yep, yep,
Okay, so runs around alongside Parkrun. And so effectively, you set up a startup striders, which is a group of startups that will decide to do Parkrun every Saturday, and so on. Within their local Parkrun. And in our case, we actually managed to go through all different ones, different weeks, different ones. Anyway, and so again, it's a very social endeavor. So we're catching up together on Saturdays, and then we go for a coffee afterwards. So the thing that we all have in common is startups, and then some incredible things happen in kind of the world outside of fitness. So those intersections, that community, that connection, do you belong to the startup community and all that? I think for me that's really interesting. And so what I did, that's kind of what I didn't hear you say on that particular, and that's what if it were me, that's what I would add. Mark from Strava. Uh, and for example, like it was, much about the Strava story?
no,
No. Okay. So anyway, so we're catching up with Mark, whatever, a couple of years ago, and then effectively it was for them. It was a case of beginning with bicycle riders. Effectively, it began like that. Now Strava gets used for all different kind of sports, but it began with that. Why? And the reason for the success they're saying because they noticed that cyclists had this basically this group of people that would just like they were just them against the world situation. They would
Yeah.
go, they would, if they would did whatever, like night riding or whatever, they would be like, they'll be consistent at it. They will keep each other accountable. They, if there was a car that was trying to run them over, they would all
It was a
stay on the
cult.
car.
Yeah, it
It
was
was
a
a cult,
tribe.
a cult.
Yeah, yeah.
That's what they become. So I think
Oh,
if you want,
Strider. Sorry. Yes. Now,
yeah,
yeah, cool.
yeah, 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 Strava, yeah. So Strava. So that's the story with Mark. And so he was saying that they found that cohort to be effective like a cult, and so nobody was servicing them well. And so again, for me, when I think fitness and that's what goes through my mind. I think, for example, most clubs have their own apps. That's okay, but we're part of Fitness Possible. We can go through all different gyms, right? For us, I don't want an app per club. I want the one app, for example. That could also be really good. And so yeah. So for me, it's around social, it's around our network, and yeah, that's the element. Now, AI. What I would do there is, have you come across Body? So I'll give you the spelling 1 second. I'm just okay. Boardy, Body.
No.
Okay.
Tell me
Oh,
about it.
actually, you have. I sent it to you on LinkedIn. And so what
Oh,
Body
yes, sorry.
does?
I'm Bordy. Yes. So
Yes, go ahead.
yes, I have heard of this twice now. One
Yes.
was about 3 months ago, and one was from yourself, and it was
Okay.
about introductions, right?
Yes, exactly. So imagine if you're able to bring in a body that, if you don't have the love of your life as your fitness partner, you can actually have a body style AI connecting you with someone, and so you get your fitness buddy. Does that make
Yeah.
sense? And the intelligence is in how body works. It's amazing. If you haven't tried it, please do. And yeah, amazing stuff. And so it's just out there in the background, just hey, this so and so is, and then you tell body like, and the reason why body will suggest someone is because in a conversational interface, you would tell body, look, I would ideally like to train with someone, my age, my gender, or whatever, right? And so all body goes out and that's the hunting and so on, and matches people together. So to me, that's how I would use it, and that would be very different. And not sure if it's the winning formula, but because and the only reason why I'm saying all that is because that's what got me to consistently train over now 15 years or whatever. Yeah, through.
I love it. And so the two things I really took away from that were three things were community, accountability, and technology, leveraging technology. Okay, so I'm gonna dust this one off. I'm gonna change that. So it's not Health Echo anymore. We're gonna go back to an idea that I was exploring with a friend of mine called accountable. So you
Okay.
can either add a friend or find someone like a boardie.
Yeah.
And create like a social kind of environment. But you have to put in your goals and hold each other accountable, get little, badges and gamify, but also check-ins. But if you didn't have anyone, because we know loneliness is such a big
Yeah.
predicament at the moment across the globe, you could have an AI coach or accountability coach.
Yep.
And so that would be really cool as well. All right. That
Great.
we're taking that one offline. I love that. So we're going to work on that. That sounds good. Alex, you've been amazing. This is so good. I felt like we could have talked for more and more. We have covered so much ground. I feel like I could spend a day or two with you. That was,
Yeah. I
I'm
wanted
so
to share some more
appreciative of
war
your time.
stories. Sorry, I was going to say I wanted to share some more war stories we didn't get to, but anyway.
No, that's okay. I have a feeling this will not be the last time we talk. If if you're keen to catch up again, but yeah, that was. Thank you so much for joining us today, and for all our viewers. If they want to learn more about you or get involved with your work, how can they find you? Do you want to be found or?
LinkedIn, yeah, for sure. LinkedIn, we're very busy these days, but yeah, but happy to help. If we can help someone quickly, that's a given. And yeah, yeah. But LinkedIn is the way to find me. It's just Alex dash Retzlaff. So yeah,
Excellent.
to find.
And yeah, when we decided to do this podcast and we're looking for the type of guests we want, you absolutely are the ideal, and you certainly delivered. So thank you so much for your time and your generosity. It's been outstanding. So Yeah. And for those watching today, I hope you got a lot out today, and we'll see you on the next episode of Unicorn Ventures. All the best. Bye.